So what is the connection and the difference between urban planning and architecture?
I think the easiest thing to think about with that is that urban planning deals at a much wider scale. Okay, so when we're dealing with architecture, we're often dealing with a single building or a group of buildings or a singular site. Urban planning or planning requires us to look at that site in context, and not just in the context of its immediate surroundings, i.e. the site next door or its city, but also at regional scale and sometimes super-regional scale.
Would you say does it make sense for architects and planners to work together, or are they two total different, separate views?
You can't deal in isolation. And as a planner, and we're dealing with an awful lot of other professions as well. We deal with the highways engineer, we deal with the landscape architect, we deal with the flood risk engineer, or the ecologist, or the architect, and all of us have to work together as a team, and we all have to be flexible in our scale, and we all have to understand to some degree what one or the other does. Fine, I'm not an architect, and I don't think I need to understand load-bearing structures, etc., for the inside of the building. But at the flip side, I need to know the sort of spatial requirements and the sort of design and the things that an architect's trying to do with the look of his or her building, with the way in what its use function is.
I mean, my take on it would be from an environmental angle. So I would say that whilst I've always considered architects and planners needing to communicate, I think the mandate for that is growing ever larger when we're thinking about the challenges of climate change and trying to become more sustainable. So, for example, one of the large movements that we're moving towards with green infrastructure is green roofs. Well, planners can say it would be good to have green roofs there, but we can't do that without the input of architects to tell us about the load-bearing structures, whether the walls can support a 2 feet substrate that can support more ecologically diverse habitats than, say, just a sedum roof. That has to mean that if we're planning that on a strategic scale as planners or environmental managers, we have to work very, very closely with architects, and not just work with them, but start to actually understand where the other is coming from and understand each other's profession. And I think, as I say, that mandate is growing more with the environmental challenges that face us in the future.
In architecture, you often think that architects can also do the planning part for themselves. So do we actually need planners?
The idea is that planning could be easily accessible by any member of the community with anything at all. Occasionally, you get a project which is slightly off-piste, slightly awkward, slightly difficult, and that could be any number of reasons. That could be the local authority, that could be the Environment Agency, and I think that's when planners come into their own, because planning in itself, when it gets complicated, starts to turn into a different language, and you have to approach it in certain ways depending on certain things, and resolving conflict, trying to find the common ground, all of those sort of things. And that's what, as planners, we're trained to do. And I think that's where we can assist an architect who's taking a project through.
Perhaps planners perceive the world quite differently from architects, in the sense that they will think about how space is used from a social demographic perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a large area of critical debate in the planning profession, and that whole area of social science, which I think maybe isn't engaged with in the same way within the architecture profession.
The term sustainability is quite a new term for architecture. You might say, is sustainability also something new for planning, or was it always a topic?
I would go that sustainability is derived from the term sustainable development. And therefore the development is absolutely key to that. Now, of course, development has two connotations or meanings. You can think of development in terms of economic development and actually progressing further. You can also think of development in terms of enhancing or developing the built infrastructure. So something might have an economic focus, but it should also be beneficial to the social demographics of the area and the environment around it. And whichever the focus is. I think it's fair to say that at the moment, because of the kind of economic austerity, there is an absolute push for economic growth, and how that is being balanced through the sustainable development agenda leaves a lot to be there.
If planners and architects and whatever other professions we want to do, and we've mentioned some of them, if we don't all work together, you get a poor development. You can have the most brilliant building in entirely the wrong place, scheme fails. You can have the right sort of building, but if the design's poor, or its architecture is poor, its use value is poor, then it fails as well. Unless you've got both of them hand in hand, the right building in the right place at the right time, doing the right things, having the right spin-off benefits, then any project can fail.
What is the cliche that urban planners have of architects?
My cliche of an architect is just somebody sat with a mechanical pencil in hand, crouched over a board, kind of mechanical desk, and never really sees the light of day.
My cliche is don't they all wear black shirts and black and black polo neck jumpers in the winter, and they all have designer glasses.
Yeah,
designer glasses, and they sit there, and the architect goes and does a site visit, and whereas the planner would take a picture of the site, the street next door, the architect walks around the outside of the site and only takes pictures looking in, and doesn't take any pictures looking out.
And could you imagine what the architect's perception of a planner would be, like what the cliche of the planners are?
Oh yes,
it's Bob. He sat here. This is the cliche.
I know exactly what, and some architects have told us that planners make an easy job 7 times as difficult as it ought to be.
How?
By introducing things that are not relevant to us developing this building. And I think sometimes architects see planning as a hindrance, and probably rightly so, because they've got a very clear idea of what it is they want to create. They know why it's a good idea, and all planners are, why? Why? Tell us why. Tell us why. Are you sustainable with that? It's a building. Look, it looks good. And sometimes, planners want architects to state the bleedingly obvious.
How much collaboration is there between the Department of Urban Planning and the Manchester School of Architecture?
Blimey, not as much as there should be. We are sister departments within the School of Environment and Development, and therefore we should run kind of concurrently. We should have access to each other's courses. Although we are kind of, there's plenty of collegiality between the academics, that isn't a problem, but there is nothing like enough interaction or interdisciplinary work in terms of research. There is some, but it's pretty limited, and on the whole, actually, it's more between the environmental management, green infrastructure side and links to architecture, and certainly far too limited in terms of teaching. So, for example, at the moment, we can't actually let our students access architecture courses. So
I think Anna's said it all. In all fairness, it's a problem that we need to look perhaps Manchester-wide. The Manchester School of Architecture has under its wing a landscape architecture course that we also don't have access to. We have environmental management here. We have highways engineering somewhere else in a UMIS that we don't speak to. Yeah. Essentially, if I was going to say my way, and I will say bold and be controversial, essentially we just need to put everything aside and found the Manchester School of the Built and Natural Environment and be done with it, and put all of them in one and accredit it by whoever wants to accredit it. But we've got to get away from, that's in MMU, that's in the old UMIS bit, that's in Manchester, that's something that was kind of taught at Salford once upon a time. It's got to come together if we're going to start to demonstrate to our students what we've been talking about today, the fact that everybody needs to work collaboratively and together.